Alrighty then. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Matthew Baker of Beautiful New York Tours. One thing that keeps New Yorkers from going crazy during a time of quarantine is the chance to take socially distant walks. And of course, a lot of people like walking in their local park. Whatever neighborhood they may be in, there is a park that they can use. But this was not always so. The colony of New York was over 100 years old before we had a public park. It happened in New York. The year is 1733, and the place is the foot of Broadway. The colony of New York is barely a generation old, and the old Fort Amsterdam has now become Fort George. The Common Council passes a resolution for the creation of the Bowling Green, the area just north of the old Battery. It had been a gathering place for years during the Dutch times. It was the Heerstraat, the high street that became Broadway, and they called it the Plain, or the Plain afore the Fort. Later, it became a parade ground and a cattle market. But with the establishing of the first official park in the city, the council leased the land to three lessers, Peter Bayard, John Chambers, and Peter Jay, all of whom are now the namesakes of downtown streets. The rent for the land was 1 peppercorn per year. The three men accepted responsibility to beautify the park, as the lease stated, for the beauty and ornament of the said street, and for the recreation and delight of the inhabitants of the city. But of course, it rarely turns out that way, because it was really for the recreation and delight of the upper crust New Yorkers who lived in the fancy townhouses immediately surrounding the park. It would not be until 1825, by which time the streets had been paved with flagstones, which they hadn't been at the time of the park's origin, and most of the high-end residences had given way to shipping offices, that there was true, full public access to the park. In between the park's birth and the time it became fully accessible, though, it was the site of two major events in the American Revolution, one at the Revolution's beginning and one at its end. In 1770, a gilded lead statue of King George III had been erected at the Bowling Green, and it continued through its 6 years standing there to be the site of many vocal protests against the type of behavior the king perpetrated on the colonies until eventually the American Revolution severed the ties. The city in 1773 passed anti-desecration and anti-graffiti laws and installed a cast iron fence around the park to protect the monument. That fence is still there. It is the oldest fence in the city, and it's on the National Register of Historic Places, and is a very popular stop on historic walking tours. But the statue is not still there. Neither the fence nor the laws could protect the monument from the righteous anger of the Sons of Liberty. On July 9th, 1776, after the first public reading of the Declaration of Independence in New York, a mob of newly enfervored patriots marched down to the Bowling Green and toppled over the statue of King George III. They melted the lead down for musket balls, so King George's soldiers were shot by King George's statue. At the end of the Revolution, the park became the site of Evacuation Day, when the final British troops were sailing through the bay to go home. There was no Battery Park at that point. That was all 19th century landfill. So Broadway, just below Bowling Green, served as the southern tip of the island of Manhattan. Now, the legend has it that all the new patriots were rushing down to shake their fists at the retreating English and probably throw a few other interesting gestures their way as well. One English captain took umbrage and fired a cannon shot towards the Americans. Fortunately, he was a terrible marksman. He didn't hit anything, but that is acknowledged as the final shot of the American Revolution, and that was right there at the Bowling Green. Bowling Green is one of many wonderful historic sites downtown that are worth looking at once it is safe to do so. Please check me out at Beautiful New York Tours. You can search Beautiful New York Tours on Facebook or email me at baker.tours@yahoo.com. Again, that is baker.tours@yahoo. Thank you very much.